Before breakfast this morning, a sushi chef, a retail worker, and literally a plumber all pushed commercial-grade software updates to the web.
Yeah, and none of them actually know how to code.
Exactly. None of them. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are tearing into a massive leaked chat log from a Taiwanese Claude code community.
It is a wild read.
It really is. Our mission today is to decode this frontier of what they call vibe coding. We're going to explore why absolute beginners architecting payment systems is, well, a massive security liability.
She put it mildly.
Yeah. And we also need to unpack the brutal commercial reality of building your entire business on someone else's AI model.
Because the sheer velocity of what is documented in these logs, it just completely rewrites our understanding of software development.
It does.
The barrier to entry hasn't just dropped. The floor has completely fallen out. I mean, you have people with absolutely zero technical background suddenly deploying complex digital infrastructure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the commercial impact, we really need to look at who is actually doing the building here.
Right, the demographics.
Yeah, the diversity in these chat logs is just absurd. Like, there is a retail worker spinning up proprietary video editing tools.
Wow.
Yeah. And you have a traditional artist building complex 3D visual interaction systems. And I was looking at this one message from a high schooler.
Oh, the POS system guy.
Yes. Someone who actively admits to being dead last in his class.
Yeah.
And he is writing a fully functional POS, a point-of-sale system, for retail stores.
That high schooler's POS system is actually a perfect example of the UX breakthrough happening right now.
How so?
Well, older generative models, they required the user to actually understand the code being output. You know, you'd ask an AI to write a function, it would spit out a snippet, and then...
You'd have to figure out what to do with it.
Exactly. You, as the developer, had to manually integrate it, resolve the dependencies, and basically pray it didn't break your database schema.
Right. It was essentially just a sophisticated autocomplete.
Precisely. Which still required you to be a programmer. You had to know where the snippet belonged in the broader architecture.
But the workflow described in these logs, it's fundamentally different. Like this water and electrical plumber who jumped into the chat. He isn't copy-pasting Python into an IDE.
No, not at all. He's using an autonomous workflow.
Right?
The users in this community are leveraging tools like Claude Code directly through their local CLI.
The command line interface.
Right. They just rough out their idea in plain Chinese in a chat interface, and then they point the AI to their local directory or a GitHub repository.
And it just takes over from there.
Yeah. The AI doesn't just suggest code. It reads the entire existing code base to understand the context. Then it writes the new logic, executes terminal commands to install the necessary Chrome extensions or NPM packages, and even runs its own debugging loops.
That is wild. It's like having a master architect and an entire construction crew trapped inside your terminal.
That's a great way to put it.
You don't need to know how to pour concrete or, frame a load-bearing wall. You just describe the vibe of the house you want.
Hence, vibe coding.
Right. You say, I want a big window looking at the mountains. And this invisible crew calculates the structural load, orders the glass, and just installs it.
And that context window is the critical mechanism there, because the AI can hold the entire architecture of the app in its memory simultaneously.
Yep.
So it understands that adding a window on the second floor means it needs to reinforce the framing on the first floor.
Oh, I see.
In software terms, it knows that if it adds a new user profile field in the front-end UI, it autonomously writes the migration script to update the back-end database to store that new field.
I mean, I was reading a message from a user who says they only started using Claude last month, and they're already feeling like a boss because they're deploying live apps.
Which is an incredible feeling, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. But hold on, let's go back to this high schooler building the POS system. If he is just describing the vibe to this invisible crew, what happens when a sophisticated threat actor hits that POS system?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question.
Because how structurally sound is this code if the kid doesn't even know what a digital load-bearing wall actually is?
You've hit on the most anxious undercurrent of this entire leak document.
I mean, they seem terrified.
They are. These vibe coders are thrilled that they can spin up a product in a weekend, but the chat is just riddled with panic about actually putting it on the market.
Because of the security risks.
Exactly. They are integrating major payment gateways, things like ECPay and LinePay, into systems they fundamentally do not understand.
The terminology they are throwing around is terrifying. Like, they are asking each other about SQL injections and AES 256 encryption.
Right, highly advanced security concepts.
Yeah, and they are telling the AI, make my database secure,
Yeah.
but they openly admit they have no idea how to verify if the AI actually did it.
What's fascinating here is how the primary bottleneck in the software industry has inverted overnight.
Inverted, what do you mean?
Well, for decades, the hardest part of software engineering was simply generating the logic. Getting the syntax right, making it compile, building the overall architecture.
Right, just getting the thing to work.
Exactly. But today, generating the code takes seconds. The new massive bottleneck is auditing that code.
So relying on AI defaults for security is kind of like asking a contractor to build a house, and they install a standard hollow core interior door on your front entrance.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
It looks great, it opens and closes perfectly, but anyone with a crowbar can pop it open in 3 seconds because you didn't explicitly ask for a deadbolt in a solid steel frame.
The AI defaults to functional, not fortified.
Right.
Let's look at the specific database mechanics they are struggling with in the logs. They specifically talk about Supabase and RLS, which stands for row-level security.
Okay, what is that exactly?
So in a standard multi-tenant application, all your users' data sits in the same database tables. Row-level security is the policy that ensures user A can only query the rows belonging to user A.
So I can't see someone else's stuff.
Right. It prevents you from seeing the billing history of user B, for example.
But if you don't turn that on, the app still works perfectly for the end user, right? Like they log in, they see their dashboard, everything looks fine.
Functionally, it appears flawless. But under the hood, the entire database is completely exposed.
Wow.
A malicious actor could just intercept the API call, strip away the front-end user ID filter, and request the entire table.
Oh, man.
The AI might write the front-end interface flawlessly, but if the Vibe coder doesn't know, they need to explicitly prompt the AI to configure strict RLS policies in the back-end schema.
The system will just happily serve up everyone's credit card data to whoever asks.
Exactly.
And since the Vibe coder can't read the documentation, they can't verify if the door is solid wood or cardboard.
Exactly. And one of the users in the log gets a warning from a traditional engineer friend about this.
Oh, I remember this part. The friend tells them, you can guard against gentlemen, but you can't guard against villains.
Which really frames the liability issue here perfectly.
Right, because if I swipe my credit card on a KOS system built by a sleepy teenager who is legally and financially responsible when that database gets dumped on the dark web,
The liability falls on the creator. And the scale of the vulnerability is immense.
but they try to justify it, right?
Yeah, the users in the chat try to rationalize it by pointing out that massive tech giants like Microsoft and Cloudflare have severe zero-day vulnerabilities all the time.
Right, like, well, Microsoft gets hacked too.
But that is a total false equivalence. Microsoft is dealing with highly complex, novel attack vectors. An AI-generated app built by a beginner without RLS configured.
It's just a sitting duck.
It's vulnerable to basic scraping scripts that a script kiddie could run.
So if the security risks are this catastrophic, and the creators themselves are terrified of the liability, why is there such a frantic rush to build?
Yeah, why not slow down?
Right, why not slow down and learn the fundamentals?
The commercial leverage is simply too massive to ignore. We are looking at a literal gold rush where a single individual with a $20 monthly subscription can undercut established software agencies.
Wow. There is a story in the logs that illustrates this perfectly, actually.
The ERP one.
Yeah, the ERP one.
Ah.
A client needed a specific Excel import function added to their existing ERP software.
Right.
And the traditional agency that built the ERP pushed back. They likely had to slot it into a sprint, calculate developer hours, run it through QA, and they quoted a massive price. Or maybe they just refused to do it entirely.
Because traditional firms have overhead, they have legacy code bases, technical debt, and strict protocols that make them move incredibly slowly on ad hoc feature requests.
But the Vibe coder sees this gap. They sit down, fire up the AI, and generate the Excel import script in a matter of minutes.
Minutes. It's insane.
They deliver it to the client, solve the immediate friction point, and instantly make that established software agency look bloated and obsolete.
It's a huge disruption.
And there's another user in the chat who talks about launching a fully native app on the iOS App Store using nothing but Google's Gemini. They bypass the entire traditional studio model.
The economics of that are staggering, but it introduces an entirely new class of risk.
Oh, definitely.
While these developers are undercutting traditional agencies, they are simultaneously handing absolute control of their business infrastructure over to a handful of AI platform vendors.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The existential threat to these solo developers isn't just hackers. It's the AI platforms pulling the rug out from under them.
The platform risk is huge.
The chat logs are just dominated by a constant grinding anxiety over API limits and platform dependency. They talk about burning through their expensive max-tier plans in a matter of hours.
And that token burn is a direct result of the autonomous workflow we discussed earlier.
Right, because the AI keeps reading the files.
Exactly. When an AI agent is operating autonomously in your CLI, it has to repeatedly read your code base to maintain context.
So if you have a project with 50 files,
And the AI needs to debug a single component, it might ingest thousands of lines of code into its context window, propose a fix, realize the fix broke a different file, ingest the code base again, and iterate.
and every single one of those loops consumes massive amounts of tokens.
Massive amounts.
So they're essentially running an incredibly expensive engine at Redline just to fix a typo.
Pretty much.
But the token cost is just a financial drain. The real terror is the platform policies themselves. The community specifically discusses the fallout from the Below-in incident and the OpenClaw ban.
Right, OpenClaw. That was a wildly popular third-party tool that developers used to route Claude's capabilities into their local environments.
It allowed it to interact with their file systems, right?
Yes. It was a crucial bridge for vibe coders before official tools caught up. But Anthropic, the company behind Claude, suddenly tightened their automated security measures.
And without warning, the creator of OpenClaw had their Anthropic account suspended for suspicious activity.
Which is terrifying because this wasn't a manual ban, it was an automated system flagging the API usage patterns.
Yeah, an Anthropic engineer even had to jump into a public forum to clarify.
Yeah.
They said they weren't intentionally targeting OpenClaw users, but the automated systems were aggressively suspending accounts anyway.
But the collateral damage was immediate. I mean, think about it. If your entire development pipeline, or worse, your live production app relies on that specific API connection,
And an automated trust and safety bot flags your account.
your business ceases to exist in an instant. You have no recourse, no customer service line to call, and no alternative infrastructure ready to go.
It's the ultimate platform lock-in. It's like building a booming, highly profitable retail business inside a shopping mall, only for the mall owner to randomly decide your foot traffic pattern violates a new automated policy.
That's exactly what it feels like.
They change the locks on your storefront overnight, and you lose everything.
The alternative is building a multi-cloud architecture. You know, a traditional engineering team might use OpenAI for natural language processing, Anthropic for coding tasks, and maybe a local open source model as a fallback.
But a vibe coder doesn't have the technical depth to orchestrate failovers between multiple APIs.
No, they are forced to go all in on a single provider, basically accepting the massive platform risk as the cost of doing business.
Which forces these solo developers to be incredibly agile. They're constantly adapting to shifting API limits, sudden deprecations, and model updates that inexplicably break their prompts.
It's a treadmill.
But the most profound shift happening in this community isn't technical at all. It's a fundamental realization about the nature of their own product.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the barrier to creating software dropping to zero means that software itself is no longer the scarce resource.
Right.
When anyone can generate a complex application in an afternoon, the market is instantly flooded with identical functional tools.
One of the users in the chat distills this reality perfectly. They write, "Marketing is the core of vibe coding."
Wow. That hits the nail on the head.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because if the product is free to generate, the only thing that actually holds value is distribution.
Right. How do you capture attention? How do you convince a user to trust your AI-generated tool over the 10,000 other AI-generated tools that launch that same exact week?
The value of manual coding syntax is just plunging toward zero. Traditional developers who pride themselves solely on their ability to write a flawless sorted algorithm or manually structure a database query.
They're going to find their skills heavily commoditized.
Yeah. The community basically sees them as sitting ducks if they refuse to adapt.
And the chat even develops this dark sense of humor about it. They joke that in the AI era, being a plumber is truly the most valuable profession.
Which is funny but true. You can't prompt a language model to come to your house and fix a burst pipe.
Exactly. Physical, tactile skills are entirely insulated from this disruption.
But for those staying in the digital realm, the evolution is clear. The successful vibe coder is transitioning into a one-person tech agency.
Yes, they are chaining together various AI agents to handle the execution, but they are retaining the high-level cognitive tasks.
They are identifying the market needs, designing the user experience, managing those immense security and platform risks, and executing the sales strategy.
So they become the director, not the actor.
Right. So what does this all mean? If we look at the landscape illuminated by these Taiwanese chat logs, we are staring at an industry that has been permanently fractured.
The gatekeepers are gone.
They are gone. The ability to build software is now democratized. But the expertise required to secure and sustain that software is definitely not.
No, not at all.
We are entering an era of absolute software abundance. But that abundance is going to be messy, volatile, and heavily dependent on the whims of a few massive tech platforms.
We are replacing the slow, deliberate engineering cycles of the past with a rapid, high-risk, high-reward ecosystem. The creators who thrive will be the ones who understand that the AI is just a tool for execution, not a substitute for business acumen and risk management.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the absolute wildness of vibe coding. We've explored how retail workers are undercutting established software agencies, the terrifying reality of databases built without foundational security, and the precarious high-wire act of building an empire on rented AI infrastructure.
It's a brave new world out there.
It really is. But I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to explore on your own. We've established that vibe coders are essentially acting as architects, directing an invisible crew of AI workers to build their software.
Right.
But as the bottleneck shifts from generating code to auditing code, we are increasingly relying on AI models to review, test, and secure the very systems they just built.
Which is a whole other layer of risk.
Exactly. If the human doesn't understand the code anyway, how long until the AI construction crew realizes they don't actually need the architect's crude, plaintext blueprint? How long until the AIs are simply negotiating with other AIs about what the software should do, optimizing systems and languages we can't even read, leaving human developers entirely out of the loop?
That is a wild thought.
Right. When you look at the complex application you just vibe coded, are you really the visionary architect, or are you just a temporary bystander watching the machine learn how to build itself?